The truth is, if you have ADHD, people may perceive you in a more negative way. And that really, really, really sucks.
Yeah, this is like the worst part of the whole thing.
What did this video look like? I was like, release the tapes. I want to see the video. I want to know if this is accurate.
Basically, we're looking at an ADHD combined person. Hello, nice to meet you.
Yeah, seriously. Right. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the ADHD Research Recap. Today we have two very interesting papers. We're talking about stigma for women with ADHD, particularly those who have observable symptoms. And we're also talking about the symptomology of restlessness as it relates to ADHD, which is something we don't often think about outside of that first initial diagnosis. We're often more focused on inattention and how restlessness might be related to mood disorders and ADHD as well. So a lot of interesting things to dig into, a lot of personal stories to share as well, I think, which will be interesting as we go through. So the first paper is going through basically what they wanted to do. So this was from the Journal of Attention Disorders once again. And what they wanted to know is there a stigma against ADHD? Well, actually, they didn't even want to know if there was a stigma. They wanted to know if the stigma against ADHD was driven by having and taking prescription medication or behavioral symptoms. And this one was tough for me. I felt very not called out, but it really hit my own personal experiences. So, Sarah, do you want to take us through a little bit about what the methodology is? And I'll try and put myself together to have this conversation, to be honest.
Sure. I mean, I kind of missed that shade that they threw there because you're right. The research question is literally like, is the stigma associated? It's like, okay. I mean, I guess it has been well researched, and actually their introduction lists many, many studies, some as far back as 1975 about the stigma observed in women. They were looking at women specifically.
Yeah. So we're going to talk to women specifically as a result. And obviously being women, we have that experience, but I know that for everybody, there's going to be some stigma for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So they, recruited the participants from undergrad psych courses. So there were 314 of them in the US.
Yeah.
The sample's 84% female. Yeah.
Very, very high.
Well. Yeah. It seems like self-selecting a little bit. They were probably told what the study was prior to signing up. It doesn't mention it in the paper.
Yeah, but you could almost call it women's stigma of women with ADHD because that's how many women
talk
were
about
in the study.
It.
Yeah, now they do. They get into it. They get into it.
So anyway, what did they do? So they separated the participants into 4 groups, and each group watched a different video where the same actress played like a different profile that they created in collaboration with psychologists and things like that. Each video, it's important to note that each video answered the same 9 questions. So the profiles were basically like the way that they measured the variables. So they were looking at stigma. So the first profile was their control. It's the neurotypical with no meds discussed. The second profile is meds discussed, but neurotypical behavior. The third, ADHD symptoms only, no med disclosure. And then 4 is both symptoms obvious and meds were disclosed.
Yeah. Yeah. And everyone got shown this once. So it's not like you were shown an actress and then you were shown an actress doing something else. From their perspective, this was just a person doing these actions.
Yes. And the actress herself was their peer, essentially. Yeah. A woman in her 20s.
So basically, they wanted to look at the following symptoms. They looked at like whether in terms of the behavioral, the ADHD behaviors, because I was very curious, like what did this video look like? I was like, release the tapes. I want to see the video. I want to know if this is accurate.
Yeah.
Yep. But they said they didn't release the tapes, but they did say that the video they showed difficulty sustaining attention, not seeming to listen when directly addressed, difficulty with organization, frequently losing things. I'm not sure how they got this into one video, to be honest.
Yeah. It said they were only like 4 to 8 minutes long. So I would imagine that the 8-minute video was all of this stuff.
Yeah. Which I guess is its own point, which we might want to discuss.
Yeah.
Being easily distracted by extraneous stimuli, hyperactive, impulsive symptoms. So that was fidgeting and squirming, leaving the seat that the person was expected to remain in, feelings of restlessness, acting as if being driven by a motor, and excessive talking. So that was everything that was in that video.
Yeah. Essentially, they said that they wanted the person to meet the diagnostic criteria for ADHD, and both inattentive and hyperactive symptoms were presented. So, yeah, basically, we're looking at an ADHD combined person. Hello, nice to meet you.
Yeah, seriously.
Hi, it's me.
It's me. And then they asked, which I thought was kind of interesting.
This is like the worst part of the whole thing, because then they asked the participants to like rate the person.
Yeah, but not just to rate in general. They said, how physically attractive do you think this person is? Which I was like, rude.
They justified that by citing a piece of research that said that physically attractive people are treated nicer.
That's fair. So maybe they were using that as kind of a baseline if this person was very physically attractive. They also asked how likely they would be to hire this person.
Mm-hmm.
Do they want to live with this person? Do they want to become friends with this person? Yeah.
How much they relate to that person. Do you desire future interactions with this person?
Yeah. This is the reason we're sighing is because we both are this person. I mean, I don't know how much you'd see in 11 minutes. It's quite a hard sell, but the results do not speak. They were tough to read, to be honest. This is one of the toughest papers I have had to read because I think How to ADHD, Jessica McCabe was talking a couple of weeks ago about friendship and ADHD. Because in her book, she talked about how that chapter was really difficult to write. And in fact, she needed help with the chapter on friendships because she didn't really understand it. And I thought it was very brave of her to have that conversation. And this paper really brought a lot of that back up because, yeah, friendships are difficult. Friendships have been difficult. At least that's been my experience. And it's interesting to see a paper that lays it out in black and white, why that possibly might be.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting it to go there. And then when it did, I was like, no, wait, stop. Like, this is like giving original Facebook vibes, like MySpace Tab 8 vibes. Like, this is awful. I hate it.
Yeah, so I'm sorry to everyone who is reading. They're probably like, just tell us what they found, which we will in a second. But before we go through what they found, I do want to say if you find this difficult to process, definitely know that you're not alone. We also really struggled with this paper.
Yeah. And feel free to send us an email because someone will respond.
Yeah, definitely. So Sarah, do you want to take us through what they found?
Gosh, sure. I should also probably mention real quick that they also gave these people a knowledge of ADHD test, but then they later go on to say that that was a limitation. The measure wasn't that good. And it didn't do a good job of measuring whether someone understood ADHD or not. So with that in mind.
People don't really know what that is. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So essentially, they found 3 things. Perceived ADHD behaviors were seen as negative across the board. Amongst the groups, the medication disclosure didn't elicit a negative perception. That's sort of the second thing they found, which means that, like, I think at this point, they're showing us that stimulant usage is accepted as a treatment for ADHD, which is a positive.
Yes, but ADHD behavior is not accepted.
Continues to need awareness, understanding, acceptance, sort of in the mainstream. Yeah. We're neurodivergent too. Autism has a similar branding issue.
Yeah. And they concluded that these results suggested that ADHD visible symptoms deterred people from wanting to associate someone. So any condition where the actress pretended to have ADHD was associated with lower desire for affiliation and lower liking among viewers, which honestly really hurt my feelings. I'm just going to say
I agree.
Because I think especially, one of the really amazing things about being part of the community and being part of the, ADHD Academy and all that kind of stuff is I spend so much time. I'm lucky to spend so much time with people who have ADHD all the time. It's most of what I do every day. And sometimes people say, and I really appreciate it, how much they value it. And I appreciate it, but I think I sometimes forget or choose to forget maybe why that is, because when you do associate with people who don't have ADHD, there is a stigma, and that
our
sucks.
world can be so small. That nobody around us understands ADHD or accepts it or whatever. And so, it is really important to sort of have that shared community, like someone that is like me. I remember that being really important in my diagnosis journey. But I mean, like they go on to talk about this a little bit more, the sort of negative perceptions, because the majority of the people who were rating this actress were female. And so they talk about how these people could have judged the actress more harshly due to gender stereotypes, internalized stuff where like we have to behave a certain way, and acting against that is shown to elicit social backlash. That's quotes.
Got quotation marks.
That's quotes from a 1975 study. I know it's really, really, really old, but I doubt it's changed. Sociological research doesn't age the same way psychological research does, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, if we look at what the study found, that would indicate that it's at least somewhat still the same. I think the best sort of conversation at this point is to kind of talk about what we can do. We were thinking about, the practical strategy. I'm just going to touch on it and then we can finish up and keep going. But one of the things we wanted to talk about today a little bit is mindfulness and grounding, because the truth is if you have ADHD and you have ADHD symptoms and you're out in the world, then people may perceive you in a more negative way. And that really, really, really sucks. And I say that as a person who has that experience when I venture out into the world that's outside of the neurodiverse bubble that I sometimes find myself in.
Yeah.
So it is important to think about what we can do to support ourselves in that experience. But was there anything else you wanted to say about the paper before we go into that, Sarah?
No, we did that paper.
Oh gosh. Okay. So so basically, one of the things that we talk about a lot as part of our coaching practice is this idea of mindfulness. We've talked about it before, and the grounding routine. I actually went through this with a client just yesterday, so it's quite helpful to have it fresh. But essentially, if you find yourself in a position where you do feel emotionally dysregulated, maybe you feel like people are judging you, or you are rejected by somebody, you wanted to make friends and it doesn't go the way you wanted, or you wanted to connect with somebody and it doesn't go the way you wanted, or even just it did go the way you wanted, but you knew you were masking very heavily, which can happen as well sometimes. It is good to go through some kind of, mindfulness and then grounding and then resetting routine. So Sarah, do you want to take us through a little bit of what that mindfulness piece looks like?
The first key thing with mindfulness is that you have to have a pause. You have to have a place to stop and recognize that you're dysregulated or that you're in need of some kind of mindfulness, right? And that's really the barrier to entry for most of us. But once we've captured that, right? I'm stressed. I got it. Okay, cool. What do we do?
Yeah, exactly. And so the what do we do part is interesting because, there is grounding routines, but often what we recommend is a version that has a bit more dopamine in it, essentially. So going through, kind of thinking, okay, well, what do we do? One of the first things you might want to do, especially if you're an external processor, is just find somebody that you can share with, somebody that you trust, if that's somebody that you can. If not, maybe journaling, just getting your feelings out. How am I feeling? What's going on? Checking in with yourself. And then from there, often it's about doing something that brings you into the present and grounds you. And I explained this to a client, when we have ADHD, we have quite low, we have struggle with low dopamine. So you don't necessarily want to come back into the present if the present is at a dopamine level that is not comfortable for you. So sometimes it's about setting up a space with blankets and music and candles and food, tea, and things like that, so that when you do come into the present moment, it's a comfortable, safe, good feeling present moment that you can be in. And so you're grounding yourself without being like, where am I? I'm in a room with no windows by myself. Oh my gosh, you don't want to be in that space. So the same sort of grounding systems apply really well there. What can you see? What can you smell? What can you touch? What can you taste? All of those kinds of things. Hopefully all good things. And then from there, sometimes it can be helpful. And this part, I will say, is more of something that we've found helpful specifically, and it's more based tangentially on the research than specifically on the research. But the idea of maybe checking in a little bit expectations, because sometimes, especially when we're in this situation where we're feeling rejected by somebody else, we've applied to do something with other people, or we've asked to hang out with somebody and they haven't blown us off, and we just feel like, what's going on? It's nice to sometimes check in and just go, okay, well, what are the expectations here? And have I met those expectations? Was I late to respond, or was I, and it's nice to try and be kind to yourself here. So checking in with somebody else around those expectations can be good. Because often we'll find you're like, no, I did the right thing. This was a bad feeling and I didn't appreciate it, but I did meet general expectations. And then from there, kind of thinking, okay, well, what do I want to do about that now? What are the processes I need to adjust? And this might take like a day. It might take longer than, a little bit of time, but going through that process can be really helpful. So yeah, I just dumped a bunch of information on you. I'm actually going to link the article, which explains it more in more detail.
That sounds good.
If you're reading this and you're like, whoa, okay, that's a lot of stuff. So I'll link the article that kind of goes through it. But yeah, it's a big deal to feel like this, like rejection sensitivity, all those kinds of things. Like, it's okay to need support and to need a process to help.
This whole mindfulness process, the grounding, the regulation, the self-regulation space can be sort of some trial and error, but there are some basic steps that you can just like try a bunch of things. And these are the basic steps. Safe place. Acknowledge your sensory needs. Are you overstimulated and you need like a dark space? Do you need a comfy space? Whatever. So physical space, safe. Acknowledge sort of that the emotional stimuli is temporary. Choose a grounding exercise. So Sky referenced the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, but there are thousands. There are millions.
Yes, there are.
Find one you love. Find one you love. And then pick a reset option. So that reset option can be something that we like to call a dopa starter. It's something that helps transition you back into a place where your brain is functioning as you like it to. Do you love Sudokus? Do a Sudoku. We're talking like positive reinforcement, right? You did the grounding. Now, positive reinforcement, you feel good.
Exactly. Yeah. And like I said, we'll have an article with more details about that, as well as some of the research behind it attached to this podcast episode. But to kind of round it out, this paper, if you feel weird, you're not alone. We do as well. It's tricky being an ADHD woman who like can't stop their symptoms from manifesting in the world. It's a lot of masking. It's often exhausting. It feels strange. There's a lot of like, I don't understand how this conversation is going badly, but I can feel it is going badly, but I can't like really get a grip on what's going on. Am I talking too much? Like, these are all such relatable things. I can't even begin to tell you. I could literally sit here all day and talk about, how relatable this is. So if that is your experience, you are not alone.
We know that ADHD can feel overwhelming and frustrating, and that's on a good day. And we don't want anyone to have to navigate that alone.
That's why we created the ADHD Academy, where adults with ADHD can meet, join, share stories, and support each other in a judgment-free way. If you want to connect with others who truly understand you and learn research-based strategies to help you feel more in control and build momentum in your life and work, you found the right place.
Together, let's transform your ADHD challenges into strengths. If you'd like to know more, you can click the link below to join us in the ADHD Academy.
Hope to see you there. Well, with that being said, should we jump over and talk about the second paper?
Yes, we should talk about the second paper. I feel like they're so connected.
Yes. This paper is looking at symptomology of adult ADHD in patients with mood disorders. So they're specifically looking at patients with mood disorders who also have ADHD. And this is from the archives of psychiatry and clinical neuroscience. So, Sarah, do you want to take us through a little bit about why they're related and what they looked for?
Sure. So this study was looking at, as Guy said, inpatient clinical psychiatric sample. These people had mood disorders diagnosed by a clinician and also were presenting various ADHD symptomology. The study in its sort of introduction section really sets the whole thing up for us by talking about like comorbidity rates and the research around like subclinical symptomology, things like that.
Yeah, definitely. What they looked at specifically was they looked at 1,000 participants aged between 18 to 70 years old. And they were looking at people who had major depressive disorder, bipolar 1, bipolar 2. The diagnosis was provided through a certified psychiatrist and then also a standardized interview and a review of the case record. So they went in on these diagnoses. And then they also looked at the ADHD self-report scale.
Yeah, I wish clinicians sort of always went so hard with the diagnostic stuff. You know, it's almost like there are some diagnoses that are so easy to get and then other ones that you have to really fight for. Yeah, that was interesting to see here. It was also my first sort of, I guess, awareness that there was a Korean version of the adult self-report scale. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, the KASRS, which was very interesting. And it's interesting because they had a lot of participants in this, like 1,000 participants. So at least in Korea, finding a lot of these people, you know, who met these criteria could be done.
Yeah, I mean, they mentioned that this was like their big hospital.
Right. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Probably in the capital.
We really are starting to get a sense of the idea that, if there's this many participants, this is probably a hospital study, if not a sort of general consensus study. So what did they find in terms of those ADHD and mood disorder symptomology?
So when they looked at all of the data and they ran all of their statistics, they found that the central factor that united ADHD and these mood disorders was the feeling of restlessness.
Yeah. And Sarah's saying it like that because they ran a lot of different studies, a lot of different tests.
There could be many more words, but that is what they found.
Yes, exactly. And it took us a bit of time at the beginning of this podcast to get to that one sentence. But they found restlessness was the key identifier, which is interesting because it is in the ADHD questionnaire, like, you know, the survey that you do, but it's definitely not a highlight. You know, usually we're talking about attention. It's called ADHD, you know, attention deficit. The focus on restlessness here was an interesting shift.
Yeah, I mean, it is right in the diagnostic criteria for ADHD as well as bipolar disorder. And they go on to talk about how, you know, restlessness is usually overlooked with mood disorders, particularly depression.
Yeah, I hadn't heard about it in relation to depression. I'm not an expert by any means, but that was the first time I had heard it.
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak to sort of my personal experience with some of these things. You know, ADHD is like definitely where I've done a lot of research. And then some of these other things where I've done some like personal rabbit hole research. Depression is definitely one of those things. And I was trying to explain it to Sky earlier. And I just, you know, it's like depression is hopelessness. And hopelessness is like not being able to change your circumstances. And I don't know about you, but that elicits restlessness in me because it's like, no, but I want to change my circumstances, right? Like I hate this, but you can't, you know, executive dysfunction, blah, 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 your circumstances, blah, 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 no support.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that, well, according to this research, that was what they found, at least as a unifying factor, was this idea of restlessness. So they wanted then to look at a way, you know, the purpose of the study was to consider a therapeutic intervention to assist feelings of restlessness in order to kind of, I guess, one-shot all of these different things. You know, if we can support restlessness, then we can kind of help across all of these different areas in some ways.
So there was one thing that they tried to find that they failed to find supporting evidence for, but essentially they were trying to look at causal relationships between the ADHD symptoms to see if there was a chicken before the egg. And so they were hoping that this restlessness, psychomotor agitation was sort of causing some of the other mood disorder symptoms and ADHD symptoms and things like that. Unfortunately, they didn't see that. But they're hoping that maybe someone with a more diverse sample in the future could find this.
They had a pretty big sample, so I'm not sure.
Sure. I think the sample was probably largely the same. I mean, they mentioned some limitations to the sample. You know, it wasn't very diverse. You know, the gender, 70% female. So we definitely see like a higher amount of female participants just because females tend to be diagnosed more with mood disorders, whereas, you know, a man might be more likely to get that ADHD diagnosis.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, at least that's what we've seen. It doesn't necessarily make sense. But in terms of, I guess, then what are the practical like ADHD skills? I mean, if we're going to talk about possible treatments for feelings of restlessness, that kind of ties in a lot with what we were talking about already, which is that mindfulness, that grounding. I mean, you could literally take that strategy, put it here, and it would be supporting restlessness as well in terms of therapeutic strategies.
Sure. I mean, for restlessness also, you could talk about things like that with your therapist. They might have some effective strategies or be able to dig into the root cause of that agitation. Because again, restlessness is sort of like a physical manifestation of that emotion.
Yeah,
that
definitely.
dysregulated stimuli.
Yeah.
You know, so there's therapy, like, you know, meds, exploring sort of what that
and movement.
Movement, of course, yoga,
huge
mindfulness,
factor.
physical trainer or a physical therapist, massages, all of those things are going to be great because you have to book a time to go be with a person. So that's that ADHD friendly accountability. And if that support is accessible to you, then that could help here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the movement one is interesting. You know, there's a lot of research now into the benefits of, and again, I'm not a mood disorder expert, so I'm going to speak more to the ADHD side of it. But, you know, there's a lot of treatment discussions now in terms of exercise and ADHD or movement and ADHD, both anecdotally and also with regards to the research itself. And so, yeah, for me personally, you know, like going for a walk, that is like a multiple times a day thing. And I know it's not always possible for everyone to do it, but, you know, right after this podcast where we've been sitting and talking for an hour and a half, I am going to go for a walk and go to a park and sit in the grass for a bit and then come back and get back into work because, you know, there's like a restlessness that comes from having sat here. Although this is a very interesting thing that I love to do and sort of needing to work through that and have that mindfulness time. So anything as simple as that, it can be hard to implement, but if you can, it's worth thinking about not necessarily how much time you're using, but more the quality of the time you're using to get things done. And that can be a helpful one when it comes to this kind of support.
I mean, so I'm a scent person. I love scents. So I've got lots of incense downstairs and candles. And sometimes when I'm having a really just like, smelling something and taking those deep breaths. And then with the added pleasure of the aroma, like I don't think that the scent of apples and cinnamon like helps my working memory, but it does help me feel happy and sort of pleased to be doing my deep breathing.
Yeah, definitely.
And then after that, I'd probably go to the bathroom and check if my water bottle is full and then get back to whatever it was that I'm supposed to be doing because that is my transition everywhere I go.
Yep. Yeah, it is interesting that you say that about, so full disclosure, I have left too many candles. I haven't burned anything down, but I've definitely left candles that should have been turned off. So I have a no candle rule for myself, but I do the same thing with essential oils, like having something to like smell can be really nice. And then if you are indoors, like just something as simple as like jumping around the lounge, if you have one, if you have a space where you can do something like that, can be a great release for that feeling of restlessness. So yeah, it's a good reminder, I think, to think about that rather than just attention, because I think we do spend a lot of time on attention, and that restlessness, it is there. It is definitely there.
Always there, bubbling beneath the surface,
whether
it's physical or not.
Exactly. That feeling of like, if I just had 24 hours, I bet I could do some huge things. At least that's how it manifests sometimes. Okay. Awesome. So 2 very, very interesting papers, at least both something that we found interesting in different ways. And hopefully you did as well. We'll obviously, as always, leave the link to the papers if you want to have a look at them in more detail. I'll also leave the link to the paper on grounding routine and also that video by How to ADHD, Jessica. I'll find that and we can link that because it is interesting to hear more people who are in the ADHD space prominently talk about struggles with making friends, because I think it's something we don't always talk about because it's uncomfortable.
I literally typed how to make a friend into the Goblin tools to see what it would give me. And it did give me some interesting ideas for different ways that I could enhance my social life. But it estimated that it would take me about 9 months. And
wow.
Like I could grow a whole person in that amount of time. Like are my
you
children
could literally grow a
my friends? Anyway.
Yeah. Goblin Tools, for those of you who don't know, is like an app. It's a free app. We can link it as well. Lots of links today.
I don't know if the mobile app is free, but the website version is always free. Goblin.tools. It will change your life.
It just breaks down things. I used it on Monday. I just wrote in how to plan your week because I was having a really low executive functioning day and I couldn't bring myself to like figure it out, which is ridiculous because I do that every week, but it was very helpful and it got me started. So yeah, it can be great. Okay, awesome. Well, wonderful to chat to you all. As always, please send us any thoughts, recommendations, stories of your own. We'd love to receive them. And we will see you in 2 weeks. We've got some really good interviews coming out, but we will see you in 2 weeks for the next research recap. See you later. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to reach out or connect with us, you can leave us a message at admin@unconventionalorganization.com.
You can also find out more about our ADHD coaching organization, read our free articles, or sign up to our online courses at unconventionalorganization.com. That's organization with a Z or an S. They both will get you there.
If you'd like to learn more about what we discussed here today, or you want to read the transcript, you can find that at our show notes page at unconventionalorganization.com.
If you've enjoyed this podcast and think someone else might find the strategies and stories helpful, the best thing you can do is share episodes using the share button in the podcast player, or leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify or your podcast player of choice, letting them know why you've benefited from this podcast.
Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you back in the ADHD Lab next week.